That light. Welcome back, strangers and friends. Today we're going to do the second chapter of Slaughterhouse 5 by Kurt Vonnegut. And I'm sorry that the last video did not contain the end of the first chapter because I ran out of storage. I'm not a filmmaker. I'm just a guy who stereo broke, so I have to read. Alright then. I'll start with the end of the first chapter and then go into the second chapter. By the way, my name is Luke, and none of you know me, and I don't care. People aren't supposed to look back. I'm certainly not going to anymore. I've finished my war book now. The next one I write is going to be fun. This one is a failure, and had to be, since it was written by a pillar of salt. It begins like this. Listen. Billy Pilgrim has come unstuck in time. And it ends like this. Pooty wheat. 2. Listen. Billy Pilgrim has come unstuck in time. Billy has gone to sleep a senile widower and awakened on his wedding day. He has walked through the door in 1955 and come out another one in 1941. He has gone back through that door to find himself in 1963. He has seen his birth and death many times, he says, and pays random visits to all the events in between. He says, Billy is spastic in time, has no control over where he is going next, and the trips aren't necessarily fun. He is in a constant state of stage fright, he says, because he never knows what part of his life he is going to have to act in next. Billy was born in 1922 in Ilium, New York, the only child of a barber there. He was a funny-looking child who became a funny-looking youth, tall and weak, shaped like a bottle of Coca-Cola. He graduated from Ilium High School in the upper third of his class, and attended night sessions in the Ilium School of Optometry for one semester before being drafted for military service in the Second World War. His father died in a hunting accident during the war. So it goes. He was treated in a veterans hospital. Billy saw service with the infantry in Europe and was taken prisoner by the Germans. After his honorable discharge from the Army in 1945, Billy again enrolled in the Ilium School of Optometry. During his senior year there, he became engaged to the daughter of the founder and owner of the school, and then suffered a mild nervous collapse. There's a garbage can there, by the way. I'm not just inanely spitting onto the ground. Sorry. I don't care if you think I'm disgusting. I know. He was treated in a veterans hospital near Lake Placid and was given shock treatments and released. He married his fiancée, finished his education, and was set up in business in Ilium by his father-in-law. Ilium is a particularly good city for optometrists because the General Forge and Foundry Company is there. Every employee is required to own a pair of safety glasses and to wear them in areas where manufacturing is going on. GF&F has a 68,000 employees in Ilium. That calls for a lot of lenses and a lot of frames. Frames are where the money is. Billy became rich. He had two children, Barbara and Robert. In time, his daughter Barbara married another optometrist, and Billy set him up in business. Billy's son Robert had a lot of trouble in high school, but then he joined the famous Green Berets. He straightened out, became a fine young man, and he fought in Vietnam. Early in 1968, a group of optometrists, with Billy among them, chartered an airplane to fly them from Ilium to an international convention of optometrists in Montreal. The plane crashed on top of Sugar Bush Mountain in Vermont. Everybody was killed but Billy. So it goes. While Billy was recuperating in a hospital in Vermont, his wife died accidentally of carbon monoxide poisoning. So it goes. When Billy finally got home to Ilium after the airplane crash, he was quiet for a while. He had a terrible scar across the top of his skull. He didn't resume practice. He had a housekeeper. His daughter came over almost every day. And then, without any warning, Billy went to New York City and got on an all-night radio program devoted to talk. He told about having come unstuck in time. He said, too, that he had been kidnapped by a flying saucer in 1967. The saucer was from the planet Tralfamadore, he said. He was taken to Tralfamadore, where he was displayed naked in a zoo, he said. He was mated there with a former Earthling movie star named Montana Wildhack. Some night owls in Ilium heard Billy on the radio, and one of them called Billy's daughter Barbara. Barbara was upset. She and her husband went down to New York and brought Billy home. Billy insisted mildly that everything he had said on the radio was true. He said he had been kidnapped by the Tralfamadorians on the night of his daughter's wedding. He hadn't been missed, he said, because the Tralfamadorians had taken him through a time warp, so that he could be on Tralfamadore for years and still be away from Earth for only a microsecond. Another month went by without incident, and then Billy wrote a letter to the Ilium News Leader, which the paper published. It described the creatures from Tralfamadore. The letter said that they were 2 feet high and green and shaped like plumber's friends. Their suction cups were on the ground, and their shafts, which were extremely flexible, usually pointed to the sky. At the top of each shaft was a little hand with a green eye in its palm. The creatures were friendly, and they could see in 4 dimensions. They pitied Earthlings for being able to see only 3. They had many wonderful things to teach Earthlings, especially about time. Billy promised to tell what some of those wonderful things were in his next letter. Billy was working on his next letter when the first letter was published. The second letter started out like this. The most important thing I learned on Tralfamadore was that when a person dies, he only appears to die. He is still very much alive in the past. So it is very silly for people to cry at his funeral. All moments, past, present, and future, always have existed, always will exist. The Tralfamadorians can look at all the different moments just the way we can look at a stretch of the Rocky Mountains, for instance. They can see how permanent all the moments are, and they can look at any moment that interests them. It is just an illusion we have here on Earth that one moment follows another one, like beads on a string, that once a moment is gone, it is gone forever. When a Tralfamadorian sees a corpse, all he thinks is that the dead person is in bad condition in that particular moment, but that the same person is just fine in plenty of other moments. Now, when I myself heard that somebody is dead, I simply shrug and say what the Tralfamadorians say about dead people, which is, so it goes. And so on. Billy was working on this letter in the basement rumpus room of his empty house. It was his housekeeper's day off. There was an old typewriter in the rumpus room. It was a beast. It weighed as much as a storage battery. Billy couldn't carry it very far, very easily, which was why he was writing in the rumpus room instead of somewhere else. The oil burner had quit. A mouse had eaten through the insulation of wire leading to the thermostat. The temperature in the house was down to 50 degrees, but Billy hadn't noticed. He wasn't warmly dressed either. He was barefoot, and still in his pajamas and a bathrobe. He thought it was late afternoon, though it was late afternoon. His bare feet were blue and ivory. The cockles of Billy's heart, at any rate, were glowing coals. What made them so hot was Billy's belief that he was going to comfort so many people with the truth about time. His door chimed upstairs, had been ringing and ringing. It was his daughter Barbara, wanting in. Now she let herself in with the key, crossed the floor over his head, calling, "Father, Daddy, where are you?" and so on. Billy didn't answer her, so she was nearly hysterical, expecting to find his corpse. And then she looked into the very last place there was to look, which was the rumpus room. "Why didn't you answer me when I called?" Barbara wanted to know, standing in the door of the rumpus room. She had the afternoon paper with her, the one in which Billy describes his friends from Tralfamadore. "I didn't hear you," said Billy. The orchestration of the moment was this. Barbara was only 21 years old, but she thought her father was senile, even though he was only 46. Senile because of damage to his brain from the airplane crash. She also thought that she was the head of the family, since she had to manage her mother's funeral, since she had to get a housekeeper for Billy and all that. Also, Barbara and her husband were having to look after Billy's business interests, which were considerable, since Billy didn't seem to give a damn for business anymore. All this responsibility at such an early age had made her a bitchy flibberty-gibbet. And Billy, meanwhile, was trying to hang on to his dignity, to persuade Barbara and everybody else that he was far from senile, that, on the contrary, he was devoting himself to a calling much higher than business. He was doing nothing less now, he thought, than prescribing corrective lenses for earthling souls. So many of those souls were lost and wretched, Billy believed, because they could not see as well as his little green friends on Tralfamadore. "Don't lie to me, Father," said Barbara. "I know perfectly well you heard me when I called." This was a fairly pretty girl, except that she had legs like an Edwardian grand piano. Now she raised hell with him about the letter in the paper. She said he was making a laughing-stock of himself and everybody associated with him. "Father, Father, Father," said Barbara. "What are we going to do with you? Are you going to force us to put you where Mother is?" Billy's mother was still alive. She was in a bed in an old people's home called Pine Knoll on the edge of Ilium. "What is it about my letter that makes you so mad?" Billy wanted to know. "It's all just crazy. None of it's true." "It's all true." Billy's anger was not going to rise with hers. He never got mad at anything. He was wonderful that way. "There is no such planet as Tralfamadore." "It can't be detected from Earth, if that's what you mean," said Billy. "Earth can't be detected from Tralfamadore, as far as that goes. They're both very small. They're very far apart." "Where did you get a crazy name like Tralfamadore?" "That's what the creatures who live there call it." "Oh, God," said Barbara, and she turned her back on him. She celebrated frustration by clapping her hands. "May I ask you a simple question?" "Of course." "Why is it you never mention any of this before the airplane crash?" "I didn't think the time was ripe." And so on. Billy says that he first came unstuck in time in 1944, long before his trip to Tralfamadore. The Tralfamadorians didn't have anything to do with his coming unstuck. They were simply able to give him insights into what was really going on. Billy first came unstuck while World War II was in progress. Billy was a chaplain's assistant in the war. A chaplain's assistant is customarily a figure of fun in the American Army. Billy was no exception. He was powerless to harm the enemies or to help his friends. In fact, he had no friends. He was a valet to a preacher, accepted no promotions or medals, bore no arms, and had a meek faith in a loving Jesus, which most soldiers found putrid. While on maneuvers in South Carolina, Billy played hymns he knew from childhood, played them on a little black organ which was waterproof. It had 39 keys and 2 stops, Vox Humana and Vox Celeste. Billy also had charge of a portable altar, an olive drab attaché case with telescoping legs, and it was lined with crimson plush, and nestled in that passionate plush was an adonized aluminum cross and a Bible. The altar and the organ were made by a vacuum cleaner company in Camden, New Jersey, and said so. One time on maneuvers, Billy was playing "A Mighty Fortress Is Our God," with music by Johann Sebastian Bach and words by Martin Luther. It was Sunday morning. Billy and his chaplain had gathered a congregation of about 50 soldiers on a Carolina hillside. An umpire appeared. There were umpires everywhere. Men who said who was winning or losing the theoretical battle, who was alive and who was dead. The umpire had comical views. The congregation had been theoretically spotted from the air by a theoretical enemy, and they were all theoretically dead now. The theoretical corpses laughed and ate a hearty noontime meal. Remembering the incident years later, Billy was struck by what a Tralfamadorian adventure with death that had been. To be dead and to eat at the same time. Towards the end of maneuvers, Billy was given an emergency furlough home because his father, a barber in Ilium, New York, was shot dead by a friend while they were out hunting deer. So it goes. Wonder if it was Dick Cheney. That's not funny. When Billy got back from his furlough, there were orders for him to go overseas. He was needed in the headquarters company of an infantry regiment fighting in Luxembourg. The regimental chaplain's assistant had been killed in action. So it goes. Shit. I can't drink to that. When Billy joined the regiment, it was in the process of being destroyed by the Germans in the famous Battle of the Bulge. Billy never even got to meet the chaplain he was supposed to assist. He was never even issued a steel helmet and combat boots. That was in December of 1944, during the last mighty German attack of the war. Pardon. Billy survived, but he was a dazed wanderer far behind the new German lines. There were other wanderers, not quite so dazed, allowed Billy to tag along. 2 of them were scouts, and 1 was an anti-tank gunner. They were without food or maps, avoiding Germans, and they were delivering themselves into rural silences even more profound. They ate snow. They went Indian file. First came the scouts, clever, graceful, quiet. They had rifles. Next came the anti-tank gunner, clumsy and dense, warning Germans away with a Colt 45 automatic in one hand and a trench knife in the other. Last came Billy Pilgrim, empty-handed, bleakly ready for death. Billy was preposterous, 6 feet and 3 inches tall, with a chest and shoulders like a box of kitchen matches. He had no helmet, no overcoat, no weapon, and no boots. On his feet were cheap, low-cut civilian shoes, which he had bought for his father's funeral. Billy had lost a heel, which made him bob up and down. The involuntary dancing up and down, made his hip joint sore. Billy was wearing a thin field jacket, a shirt and trousers of scratchy wool, and long underwear that was soaked with sweat. He was the only one of the 4 who had a beard. It was a random bristly beard, and some of the bristles were white, even though Billy was only 21 years old. He was also going bald. Wind and cold and violent exercise had turned his face crimson. He didn't look like a soldier at all. He looked like a filthy flamenco. On the 3rd day of wandering, somebody shot at the 4 from far away. Shot 4 times as they crossed a narrow brick road. One shot was for the scouts. The next one was for the anti-tank gunner, whose name was Roland Weary. The 3rd bullet was for the filthy flamenco, who stopped dead center in the road when the lethal bee buzzed past his ear. Billy stood there politely, giving the marksman another chance. It was his addled understanding of the rules of warfare that the marksman should be given a second chance. The next shot missed Billy's kneecap by inches, going end on end from the sound of it. Roland Weary and the scouts were safe in the ditch, and Weary growled at Billy, "Get out of the way, you dumb motherfucker!" The last word was still a novelty in the speech of white people in 1944. It was fresh and astonishing to Billy, who had never fucked anybody. And it did its job. It woke him up and got him off the road. "Saved your life again, you dumb bastard," Weary said to Billy in the ditch. He'd been saving Billy's life for days, cursing him, kicking him, slapping him, making him move. It was absolutely necessary that cruelty be used, because Billy wouldn't do anything to save himself. Billy wanted to quit. He was cold, hungry, embarrassed, incompetent. He could scarcely distinguish between sleep and wakefulness now. On the third day, found no important differences either between waking and standing still. He wished everybody would leave him alone. "You guys go on without me," he said again and again. Weary was as new to war as Billy. He was a replacement too, as part of a gun crew. He had helped to fire one shot in anger from a 57mm anti-tank gun. The gun made a ripping sound like the opening of a zipper on the fly of God Almighty. The gun lapped up snow and vegetation with a blowtorch 30 feet long. The flame left a black arrow on the ground, showing the Germans exactly where the gun was hidden. The shot was a miss. What had been missed was a Tiger tank. It swiveled its 88mm snout around sniffingly, saw the arrow on the ground, fired it. It killed everybody on the gun crew but Weary. So it goes. I don't have any wine poured. Roland Weary was only 18. Was at the end of an unhappy childhood spent mostly in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. He had been unpopular in Pittsburgh. He had been unpopular because he was stupid and fat and mean, and smelled like bacon no matter how much he washed. He was always being ditched in Pittsburgh by people who did not want him with them. It made Weary sick to be ditched. When Weary was ditched, he would find somebody who was even more unpopular than himself, and he would horse around with that person for a while, pretending to be friendly. Then he would find him some pretext for beating the shit out of him. It was a pattern. It was a crazy, sexy, murderous relationship Weary entered into with people he eventually beat up. He told them about his father's collection of guns and swords and torture instruments and leg irons and so on. Weary's father, who was a plumber, actually did collect such things, and his collection was insured for $4,000. He wasn't alone. He belonged to a big club composed of people who collect things like that. Weary's father once gave Weary's mother a Spanish thumbscrew in working condition for a kitchen paperweight. Another time he gave her a table lamp whose base was a model 1 foot high of the famous Iron Maiden of Nuremberg. The real Iron Maiden was a medieval torture instrument, a sort of boiler which was shaped like a woman on the outside and lined with spikes. The front of the woman was composed of 2 hinged doors. The idea was to put a criminal inside and then close the door slowly. There were 2 special spikes where his eyes would be. There was a drain in the bottom to let out all the blood. So it goes. Excuse me. Weary had told Billy Pilgrim about the Iron Maiden, about the drain in her bottom, and what that was for. He talked to Billy about dum-dums. He told him about his father's Derringer pistol, which could be carried in a vest pocket, which was yet capable of making a hole in a man, which a bull bat could fly through without touching either wing. Weary scornfully bet Billy one time that he didn't even know what a blood gutter was. Billy guessed it was the drain in the bottom of the Iron Maiden, but that was wrong. A blood gutter, Billy learned, was a shallow groove in the side of the blade of a sword or bayonet. Weary told Billy about neat tortures he'd read about or seen in the movies or heard on the radio, about other neat tortures he himself had invented. One of the inventions was sticking a dentist drill into a guy's ear. He asked Billy what he thought the worst form of execution was. Billy had no opinion. The correct answer turned out to be this: you stake a guy out on an anthill in the desert, see? He's facing upward, and you put honey all over his balls and pecker, and you cut off his eyelids so he has to stare at the sun until he dies. So it goes. Now lying in the ditch with Billy and the scouts, after having been shot at, Weary made Billy take a very close look at his trench knife. It wasn't government issue. It was a present from his father. It had a 10-inch blade that was triangular in cross-section. The rings weren't unsimple. They bristled with spikes. Its grip consisted of brass knuckles, was a chain of rings through which Weary slipped his stubby fingers. The rings weren't simple. They bristled with spikes. Weary laid the spikes along Billy's cheeks, roweled the cheeks with savagely affectionate restraint. How'd you like to be hit with this, he wanted to know. I wouldn't, said Billy. You know why the blade's triangular? No. Makes a wound that won't close up. Oh. Makes a 3-sided hole in a guy. You stick an ordinary knife in a guy, makes a slit, right? A slit closes right up, right? Right. Shit. What do you know? What do you know? What the hell they teach in college? I wasn't there very long, said Billy, which was true. He had had only 6 months of college, and the college hadn't been a regular college either. It had been the night school of the Ilium School of Optometry. Joe College, said Weary scathingly. Billy shrugged. There was more to life than what you read in books, said Weary. You'll find that out. Billy made no reply to this either. There in the ditch, since he didn't want the conversation to go on any longer than necessary, he was dimly tempted to say, though he knew a thing or two about gore. Billy, after all, had contemplated torture and hideous wounds at the beginning and the end of nearly every day of his childhood. Billy had an extremely gruesome crucifix hanging on the wall of his little bedroom in Ilium. A military surgeon would have admired the clinical fidelity of the artist's rendition of all of Christ's wounds. The spear wound, the thorn wounds, the holes that were made by the iron spikes. Billy's Christ died horribly. He was pitiful. So it goes. Billy wasn't a Catholic, even though he grew up with a ghastly crucifix on the wall. His father had no religion. His mother was a substitute organist for several churches around town. She took Billy with her whenever she played, taught him to play a little too. She said she was going to join a church as soon as she decided which one was right. She never did decide. She never did develop a terrific hankering for a crucifix, though. And she bought one from a Santa Fe gift shop during a trip the little family made out west during the Great Depression. Like so many Americans, she was trying to construct a life that made sense from things she found in gift shops, and the crucifix went up on the wall of Billy Pilgrim. The two scouts, loving the walnut stocks of their rifles from a ditch, whispered that it was time to move out again. 10 minutes had gone by without anybody's coming to see if they were hit or not, to finish them off. Whoever had shot was evidently far away and all alone. And the four crawled out of the ditch without drawing any more fire. They crawled into a forest like the big unlucky mammals they were. Then they stood up and began to walk quietly. The forest was dark and old. The pines were planted in ranks and files. There was no undergrowth. 4 inches of unmarked snow blanketed the ground. The Americans had no choice but to leave trails in the snow as unambiguous as diagrams in a book on ballroom dancing. Step, slide, rest. Step, slide, rest. Close it up and keep it closed, Roland Weary warned Billy Pilgrim as they moved out. Weary looked like Tweedledum or Tweedledee, all bundled up for battle. He was short and thick. He had every piece of equipment he had ever been issued, every present he'd received from home. Helmet, helmet liner, wool cap, scarf, gloves, cotton undershirt, woolen undershirt, wool shirt, sweater, blouse, jacket, overcoat, cotton underpants, woolen trousers, cotton socks, woolen socks, combat boots, gas mask, canteen, mess kit, first aid kit, trench knife, blanket, shelter half, raincoat, bulletproof Bible, a pamphlet entitled Know Your Enemy, another pamphlet entitled Why We Fight, and another pamphlet of German phrases rendered in English phonetics, which would enable Weary to ask Germans questions such as, "Where is your headquarters?" and "How many howitzers have you?" Or tell them, "Surrender, your situation is hopeless," and so on. Weary had a block of balsa wood, which was supposed to be a foxhole pillow. He had a prophylactic kit containing 2 tough condoms for the prevention of disease only. He had a whistle he wasn't going to show anybody until he got promoted to corporal. He had a dirty picture of a woman attempting sexual intercourse with a Shetland pony. He had made Billy Pilgrim admire this picture several times. The woman and the pony were posed before velvet draperies, which were fringed with deedly balls. They were flanked by Doric columns. In front, one column was a plotted palm. The picture that Weary had was a print of the first dirty photograph in history. The word photography was first used in 1839. It was in that year, too, that Louis J. M. Daguerre revealed to the French Academy that an image informed on a silvered metal plate covered with a thin film of silver iodide could be developed in the presence of mercury vapor. In 1841, only 2 years after, an assistant to another French guy, was arrested in some French word gardens for attempting to sell a gentleman a picture of the woman and the pony. That was where Weary bought his picture too, in the French word. Argued that the picture was fine art and that his intention was to make Greek mythology come alive. He said that the columns and the plotted palm proved that. When asked which myth he meant to represent, Lefebvre, the French guy, replied that there were thousands of myths like that, with a woman a mortal and the pony a god. He was sentenced to 6 months in prison. He died there of pneumonia. So it goes. Billy and the scouts were skinny people. Roland Weary had fat to burn. He was a roaring furnace under all his layers of wool and straps and canvas. He had so much energy that he bustled back and forth between Billy and the scouts, delivering dumb messages which nobody had sent and which nobody was pleased to receive. He also began to suspect, since he was so much busier than anybody, that he was the leader. He was so hard and bundled up, in fact, that he had no sense of danger. His vision of the outside world was limited to what he could see through a narrow slit between the rim of his helmet and his scarf from home, which concealed his baby face from the bridge of his nose on down. He was so snug in there that he was able to pretend that he was safe at home, having survived the war, and that he was telling his parents and his sister a true war story, whereas the true war story was still going on. Weary's version of the true war story went like this. There was a big German attack, and Weary and his anti-tank buddies fought like hell until everybody was killed but Weary. So it goes. And then Weary tied in with two scouts, and they became close friends immediately, and they decided to fight their way back to their own lines. They were going to travel fast. They were damned if they'd surrender. They shook hands all around. They called themselves the Three Musketeers. But then this damn college kid, who was so weak he shouldn't have even been in the army, asked if he could come along. He didn't even have a gun or a knife. He didn't even have a helmet or a cap. He couldn't even walk right, bobbing up and down, driving everybody crazy, giving their positions away. He was pitiful. The Three Musketeers pushed and carried and dragged the college kid all the way back to their own lines, Weary's story went. They saved his goddamned hide for him. In real life, Weary was retracting his steps, trying to find out what had happened to Billy. He told the scouts to wait where he went back for the college bastard. It passed under a low branch now. It hit the top of his helmet with a clunk. Weary didn't hear it. Somewhere a big dog was barking. Weary didn't hear that either. His war story was at a very exciting point. An officer was congratulating the Three Musketeers, telling them he was going to put them in for bronze stars. "Anything else I could do for your boys?" said the officer. "Yes, sir," said one of the scouts. "We'd like to stick together for the rest of the war, sir. Is there some way you could fix it so nobody will ever break up the Three Musketeers?" Billy Pilgrim had stopped in the forest. He was leaning against a tree with his eyes closed. His head was tilted back and his nostrils were flaring. He was like a poet in the Parthenon. This was when Billy first came unstuck in time. His attention began to swing grandly through the full arc of his life, passing into death, which was violet light. There wasn't anybody else there, or anything. There was just violet light and a hum. And then Billy swung into life again, going backwards until he was in pre-birth, which was red light and bubbling sounds. And then he swung into life again and stopped. He was a little boy taking a shower with his hairy father at Ilium YMCA. He smelled chlorine from the swimming pool next door. Heard the springboard boom. Little Billy was terrified because his father had said Billy was going to learn to swim by the method of sink or swim. His father was going to throw Billy into the deep end, and Billy was going to damn well swim. It was like an execution. Billy was numb as his father carried him from the shower room to the pool. His eyes were closed. When he opened his eyes, he was on the bottom of the pool, and there was beautiful music everywhere. He lost consciousness, but the music went on. He dimly sensed that somebody was rescuing him. Billy resented that. From there he traveled in time to 1965. He was 41 years old, and he was visiting his decrepit mother in Pine Knoll. An old people's home he had put her in only months before. She had caught pneumonia and wasn't expected to live. She did live, though, for years after that. Her voice was nearly gone, so in order to hear her, Billy had to put his ear right next to her papery lips. She evidently had something very important to say. "How?" she began, and stopped. She was too tired. She hoped that she wouldn't have to say the rest of the sentence, that Billy would finish it for her. But Billy had no idea what was on her mind. "How what, Mother?" he prompted. She swallowed hard, shed some tears. Then she gathered energy from all over her ruined body, even from her toes and fingertips. At last she had accumulated enough to whisper this complete sentence: "How did I get so old?" I think I'll stop there. We'll finish the rest of this chapter next time. And pretty soon we should be on to chapter 3. These chapters are really long, so I'm probably going to have to do them in 2-part increments. And for anyone who's listened up to this point, you're amazing, and thank you. And I hope that, dude, I don't think anybody's going to make it to the end of this video. So for anyone who is, I don't know, marry me. Shoot me in the fucking mouth. I don't know. Have a wonderful night. Part 2 of Chapter 2 will be up soon. Thanks so much.